do so. And if you have questions, please just use your raise hand option or post in the chat. We'll be monitoring it throughout the course of the session. We'll get to your questions, preferably at the end of the main presentation, just to prevent any kind of disruption for our presenters. As usual, please feel free to make use of our event survey. We are constantly wanting feedback and to try and see how we can get better every single time, and specifically if there's topics that interest you or if there's things you'd like us to tweak or change, please feel free to give us the feedback. We'd really appreciate it. Also on that feedback survey, there is the option to also nominate yourself as a possible presenter. We are looking for some presenters for the remaining months of the year. So whether it is something small that you want to present, a quick flash on something, 10 minutes, or a bit more of a meatier presentation, and you feel like you want to share your knowledge, please feel free. We're all friends here, so nobody will, hold you against it. So if you want to come and try your luck and give us some knowledge, that would be great as well. So please feel free to share over there. So just where we are today, sorry, the lag will eventually catch up. There we go. So we're on the 22nd of May event. We will have another event next month in June, which will be online only, and then we'll go back to the hybrid events as well. All right, so we're going to jump into the agenda. We're going to start with our Power BI news, and then go to Fabric, and then we'll head over to our main presentation where James will teach us some incredibly awesome things today. All right, fabulous. Okay, so Vusi, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Cailin. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. All right, so give me a second while I share my screen. Please do let me know when you can see it.
We can see.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so once again, thank you, Cailin. I'm going to be presenting the Power BI news today. So if I may go to the next slide, which is going to show you my agenda. Firstly, I'm going to introduce myself and then speak about the news, and then the monthly updates, and then give you some useful links. Right. So my name is Vusi. I'm a BI consultant at Zeta Analytics. So work in the same team as Finn and some of the guys that you might see from our team in this meeting. There's my email right there if you might feel you'd like to get in touch. So that's the short history about myself. Okay, moving on to the announcements. So the first one, I might say that I feel a bit guilty here because I have stolen something that's supposed to be Fabric under Cailin. She'll forgive me for that. So under Fabric, we've got the roadmap. So there's a new Fabric roadmap. There's been talks in the community that it's critical to know when they're going to release features and everything of that sort, especially ones that impact people or people might be interested in. So the Fabric roadmap just gathers everything into one place. It gives you a cleaner interface and the real-time updates. And there is the link. It'll take you to a page that looks like the screenshot that I've given you down below. And then the next one is Power BI itself. So there is a call for everyone who is still on the 32-bit to upgrade to the 64-bit version of Power BI Desktop. So the 32-bit will be deprecated in the August release, and therefore everyone, as I have mentioned, that is still on the 32-bit is encouraged to upgrade to the 64-bit. So I believe there was an announcement a couple of months ago, and the date at the time, I think it was June. So I'm not quite sure if it has been moved, but so it seems. So the benefits of moving to the 64-bit is that it's going to give you a better performance, better security, and support for the latest features and improvements of Power BI. So if you'd like to check what version you're on, there's a little instruction there on the screenshot. You just go to to help at the top ribbon of your Power BI desktop, and then you click on About, and then you'll see the details down below. Right, cool. Moving on to the monthly updates. The very first one is Copilot and AI. So they have introduced this feature, which is still in preview. It's called Standalone Pilot. So unlike the Copilot pane, which lets you ask questions about the reports that you have currently opened, the standalone Copilot pane lets you ask questions about any data that you have access to. So any kind of data that you have been given access to that you're working on, or anything of that sort, you can ask questions about. It's going to give you responses in a not in a pane, rather in a window of its own, as you can see on the screenshot with the green arrow there. So bear in mind that in as much as you might have different data sets or data that you have access to, there's still row level security. So all of that still applies. It does respect row level security. So any permissions that are pre-existing, they're still going to apply here. And then the next feature is ask questions about your data. So Copilot can answer questions and create visuals using any measures or data fields that you already have in your model. And then get summaries is the next feature. You can ask things like summarize the relationship between the weather and visits to Hawaii. You can only get summaries about the reports and not specifically the underlying models. And then the next feature that we have is get your data AI ready. So this one is still in preview as well. So what this feature is for is basically preparing the data that you have so that it is easy for Copilot to just run through it and chew it and then give you the answers that you need. So all prep data for AI features are saved at the semantic model. Prep data for AI features work best with model in import mode, and you will have written permissions on the model to use these capabilities. And then the next feature is AI data schema. So the semantic model is optimized for Power BI reporting, which means that they often have fields that might not necessarily need when we are engaging with Copilot, excuse me, when we are engaging with Copilot. So the AI data schema just gives you the ability to sift through the fields that you have so that it's basically giving you the ability to create another model that's going to be optimized for Copilot. And that's just it. So this is what it would look like here when you are trying to configure that. So, excuse me. This is available as part of the efforts to assist in preparing your data for AI applications. It allows semantic model authors to select a subset of semantic model schema as the AI data schema for Copilot to reason over in its responses. Right, I think that is clear now. Moving on. So here are things to consider if you want to be busy with Copilot. First things first, it has to be turned on the tenant settings. Secondly, you need to prep your data for good results. I think I have covered that in a slide earlier. And then mark your data as prepped. So there are warnings on unprepped data as well. And then lastly, admins can hide unprepped data. So this is something that is still not active yet. They're still going to bring it through. And then moving on to reporting. So the first thing we're going to speak about in reporting is selection expressions for calculation groups. So if you have worked with calculation groups, you know how powerful they are for simplifying measure logic and enhancing report functionality. Sorry about that. All right, so there are two types of selection expressions. The first one is multiple or empty selection expression. And then the second one is the no selection expression. So I would encourage you to go and read up on these ones as you go through the list of all the features. I will post the link to the updates at the end of the video. So the next feature on reporting is Tyndall view enhancements. So at the moment, what they have given us is context tooltips. So when you hover your mouse, it provides you information about the object that you're hovering on, which is something that wasn't there before. And then the next one, you can format your Tyndall code by pressing Shift, Alt, and F, or clicking the format option on the ribbon. And then lastly, you can rename columns in Tyndall view. So this is not something new. You could do it before, but when you do it, when you did it back before, and then say maybe you exit, and then when you come back, it reverts, and you've sort of like lost all the work that you had done before. So it wasn't saving what you had done, essentially. So the next feature is direct lake relationship improvements. So creating relationships in direct lake is now going to be much easier because you can just drag and drop columns to create relationships. And then the cardinality is now populated on the number of rows in each table, which makes life easier for the developer. And then there's assume referential integrity, which is now available for relationships between direct lake tables. So when this is checked, slicers will no longer show a blank option and assume that every value has a matching value in both tables. And then the last feature on reporting is direct lake import tables in the same semantic model. So they have recently announced the direct lake on one lake semantic model in Power BI desktop. But this is now simplifying the model on report creation with one lake data. So now you can just include import. You can also include import tables from data sources alongside direct lake tables in the same model. So moving on to the next topic, which is data connectivity. So on data connectivity, the first feature that we have is new Google BigQuery connector implementations. This is also on preview. So everything on data connection is on preview at the moment. Nothing has been released yet. So with the new BigQuery connector, to enhance integration with Google BigQuery, they have introduced this connector, which uses Arrow database connectivity instead of ODBC to connect and retrieve data from Google BigQuery, which improves performance, especially for large data sets, for large results sets. And then the next feature is connect to Vertica database with the user installed ODBC driver, which is also in preview, as I mentioned. So in April, they announced that the option of using the user installed driver to connect to the Vertica database is enabled by default in Power BI. But with the May release, this option will be enabled by default in on-premise data gateway. Yeah. And then the next one is improvements in the Snowflake connector. So in April as well, they did announce that the new option to use the built-in driver to connect to the Oracle database in Power BI Desktop. So with the May release, you can now use this to manage. You can now use this Oracle managed ODP.NET driver in on-premise data gateway as well. And then moving on to visualizations. So there's quite a few visualizations. I just picked up a couple that I thought might be interesting.
Vusi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We need to trim the news down a little bit because James needs quite a long session, and we still got the fabric news. So can you just try and choose one or two key messages to give us, and then unfortunately I've got to swap speakers.
No problem. This is my last slide anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. So in terms of the visualizations, we've got, what I've got for you is the dandelion charts, the action dots, and the dynamic radar bar charts by JTA. So I'm not going to go into detail with those ones because of time. So you can find the updates on the link, or you can just scan the QR code. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vusi. It was very thorough and in-depth. Thank you so much for all the great news coming out. Let me quickly reshare my screen and we'll jump to the fabric news.
Okay.
Oh, now okay, that's fixed. Sorry about that. My laptop just reopened my sound.
Okay, great.
Is somebody else in this room?
How did that? It's automatically resharing my sound when I try reshare my screen. All right, well, for interest of time, I'm just going to actually share the news with you. What we do, and I will post the link in the chat, we have a GitHub repo as well where we will share all of the presentations with you after the fact. You can go and look at it there. So if you want to download the slides or access any of the links, you can go there and we will make sure that's available to you. Great, so just from a fabric side of things, very, very quickly, there was the fabric conference very recently. So our news last month was very in-depth. So this month, there are only two small things I want to share with you. The first from a fabric feature, and this is generally available now. So these two were announced in May. The first is open mirroring. So this enables any application basically to write change data directly into a mirrored database in Fabric. And this is based on the open mirroring public APIs approach. So it's quite a powerful feature that extends mirroring in Fabric based on open Delta Lake table formats. So very importantly for this feature, though, you need to have an existing capacity in Fabric, and it has to be active and running for you to actually operate this component. And if you don't have that, you'll need to start a free trial just to play around with it and explore. I have got a tutorial link for you, so if you're interested in playing around with it and finding out more, navigate our GitHub. You can click on that link and you can go and try it out for yourself. Then the second little nugget for you is the semantic model refresh activity. So you can now use this semantic model refresh activity feature to refresh a Power BI dataset. And it's now the most effective way to do this for Fabric. What is really, really nice about this feature is you can actually choose which tables and partitions in those tables you actually want to refresh on a specific schedule. So it's a little bit more customizable and it's a little bit more enhanced from that side of things. Once again, there's also a link to a little tutorial if you want to try it out, see how it works, play it with it yourself, but I will share that soon. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome James, but don't worry, James, I'll give you some time whilst you're getting all set up. I'd just like to introduce James. So James has been working in the business intelligence space for over a decade. He spends his working hours building solutions that allow people to make informed decisions quickly and accurately. So currently, he's the director at Cobalt Analytics. He's also an avid musical theatre lover. So for those who are in person and like musical theatre, I'm sure you can pick James's brain after this about some of his musical theatre passions. So James speaks frequently at data community events and has presented at some of the most well-known data events around the globe, including the PASS Summit, SQL Bits, and the Power BI World Tour. So quite a knowledgeable man in our presence. James, whenever you are ready, we will hand over to you.
I didn't know I was supposed to be logged into the Teams call, so just give me like 30 seconds.
Oh,
I'm just...
No problem.
I thought I was just going to plug in. I'm like sitting here waiting to go.
No problem at all.
And also, while we're waiting, just say that James presented at the FabCon conference in Las Vegas recently, and he also became an MVP recently. So, nice work, nicely done. Yeah. And then, are you winning with the teams?
Yeah, I just got to, where's the link? So now on Teams, here. There we go. That should let us.
In the meantime, are there any questions about the news? And maybe, Vusi, you want to add some more stuff? Sorry about that.
Cool. News is quite tricky because it's actually built right now, so there's stuff coming out every day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right.
There's a lot as well. I know last month we were struggling to fit it all in without like running out of words. There was so much to go and investigate, but there is a really fabulous on the Microsoft Docs for Fabric as well. There is a really nice little breakdown of what comes out when. And if you are interested in something very specific, you can actually go and read up a lot more about it. There are like a lot more blogs. So I can also share that link with you all in the chat. If you are interested in something specific, you can navigate there.
Yeah, button works, we can go. Jeez.
Cailin, can you put up the GitHub link again?
Sure, I can also send it.
Too quick.
Yeah, it's in the chat, but I can also share it with you after this as well. Make it easier.
All right, here we are. Sorry about that. It was a terrible start. Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about storytelling, particularly storytelling with data. But we're going to start, before we go to data, we're going to just talk about storytelling. Why do we tell stories? And storytelling is literally pretty much the oldest thing in the whole world. Like, there's just about nothing that can be traced back further than the telling of stories, the relating of events by civilization. And obviously things like cave paintings being some of the oldest things that we can identify from civilization, or from humanity, should we say, are related to stories. Men hunted animals, made fire, ate, etc., etc. So the reason that stories are useful, or more useful than data, is because we form some sort of emotional connection with them. And some of the things I'm going to talk about today is how do we take relatively boring data and make it into something that we can form an emotional connection with in one way or another. And that's basically the whole purpose of this talk. Okay, so there are three real aspects towards data storytelling. Okay, the first thing is the data itself. Now, it is incredibly difficult to tell a story with just data. Okay, so what we do then is we add in some visuals, because visuals allow us to spot things like trends and lines and shapes, and because we're a visual species, and it's much easier for our brain to form a story or some sort of connection to what we're seeing when we see a picture. And then the third part of a story is what we call the narrative. Now, we'll see what that means just shortly, but basically, you can't have a good story without any one of these elements. If you have just data and visuals, you can enlighten people, but you can't get them emotionally involved. If you have data and a narrative, you can explain a bunch of stuff, but you can't get people to like see it and emotionally connect. And if you have a narrative and visuals, that's all well, but if you don't have any data, people can't do anything with it. So we need that sweet spot in the middle where we have all three of these things to allow us to tell a data story that an audience can connect with. And a data story doesn't mean Power BI or Tableau or something like that. Any time that you're presenting data, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation with some slides and graphs and numbers on it, whether it's an infographic that you've put up on a wall somewhere to show progress, any of these kinds, these are all data stories, and we'll look at how do we make those effective as we go through. So what are we going to do in this session? Now, I believe I need to go quite fast, so I'm going to move through this as fast as possible. If there's anything that anyone wants me to expand on, stop me. Please, like, put up a hand, shout, do something, let me know, and we can delve as deep as you want, but I'm going to try and go through this as fast as possible. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to just look at a data set that we're going to use to build some stories. And then we're going to explore the stories. We're going to build different stories and try and keep people involved. And then finally, we're going to explain a number of choices as to why we did what we did. So I'm going to go through a little bit of theory first, and then after that, we'll pop into a demo, and we're going to go through a demo in quite a lot of detail. Okay, so just trying to work out about. Okay, let me talk through this slide like super fast. So what do we do to build a data story? The first thing, if you don't understand the context of your data, you're never going to be able to build a story. Critical, whether it's business data, whether it's personal data, some sort of project, if you don't understand the context of the data, what you're trying to, what the data represents, what it's referring to, et cetera, you're never going to be able to build a story. So the first and most important step, understand your data. Then we choose the right visuals. Then we clean up the visuals and the data. Now, I'll show examples of that in our talks. I'm not going to talk about it at all. Then we focus on the last little bit, which is to try and allow us not to overwhelm an audience member. And then we took a look at two things. The one is the pre-attentive attribute. So pre-attentive attribute is the very first thing you notice when you see a graphic visual display of some sort. So a pre-attentive attribute is like the boldest or the biggest or the one that points in the opposite direction to everything else. That's the one that's going to immediately catch your eye, and that's the one that will form the element of the story. And then when we do all of that and put it all together, we can actually tell a story. Okay. If anyone is interested in this and you're keen, A lot of this talk is adapted from a book called Storytelling with Data by Cailin Knaflick. She used to be the head of analytics at Google. The book is great. It's really, really fabulous. And I highly recommend anyone reading that if you're interested in this. Okay, cool. So I'm going to focus on Power BI, obviously, but what things can we use within Power BI to tell stories? What takes our report from a report to a story? Okay, and we're going to look at a couple of things. Bookmarks, okay? If we have data that's not changing and we want to guide our users, our end users through the data and show them how things change, and we know that if you start with this filter, then change it to this filter, then change it to this thing, and add this and this, you can explain a whole bunch of stuff. We use bookmarks for that. We can store data states, we can store filter states, we can store visuals on and off, we can do a whole bunch of stuff like that, okay? We also can use buttons. Buttons basically link to bookmarks most of the time, but you can also do other things with them. Yeah, we can use buttons to shape our user experience. We can use a drill through. Often we don't want to overwhelm the user by having too much on one page. So what do? We allow them to see a very high level overview on a report page, and you give them a good ability to drill through and explore themselves and work through with it. We can use Q&A. Obviously, this is getting stronger and stronger with Copilot and the models and all of that. So you can use natural language queries where a non-technical user has a pane where they can type in their own questions and try and understand the background of their data. And this works quite well in Power BI. It's a lot of work from a developer side to get it set up, but once it's there, I believe it works pretty well. And with good models, you can do this. Obviously, AI, ML, I haven't updated this since Copilot came out, so it's slightly out of date, but there's loads of things within Power BI where you can integrate AI experiments, solutions, answers into and ML, obviously, with Python and R, and anything you want, you can use all of those things within your stories. And then some of the lesser known things, a scatter chart with a play axis. I'm sure some of you have seen these things on Facebook. They often come up on Facebook and Twitter and all these things where you've got a moving chart, you know, who was the top goal scorer in 1910, and then it moves on and on and on. And over time, the graphs move up and down. It's really quite a nice way to explain data over a long period of time. It's too much to try and show that in a series of graphs or one graph that has all the data. You want to be able to, it's basically taking 100 filters or 40 filters and applying them for 4 seconds each or 2 seconds each and moving them through your visual. So there are lots of tools we can use. And the other one is obviously tooltips. Power BI tooltips are really, really powerful. You can do a whole lot with them, including building a whole report page that takes the filter context of a specific thing that you're hovering over and brings up another page. Again, I'll show you an example of this so we don't have to talk through too much. Okay, I'm going to skip through all of this. So if anyone is interested, if you're interested, just go and read about the narrative arc. It's something from theatre, as Cailin said. I'm a theatre fan. The narrative arc is basically the idea that a story starts with an introduction and goes through to a conclusion. And in between, there's what we call a rising and a falling action. And not really important for now. It takes too long to make a very small point. So we're not going to go through that because I don't want to take all your time. So let's get into the nitty gritty. There are 2 types of data we can design for. Okay, the first one is data where we don't know what the questions that people are going to ask are. Okay? This is most reports. The reality is most of the time you are creating reports and visuals for what we call exploratory data. So the user is able to explore the data through your report. So that means we put in as many different slices as we can. We give them different views. We give them things like hierarchies in a graph so they can go, this is what it looks like in a year, drill down to a month, drill down to to a day, etc., etc. Exploratory data, very difficult to tell stories with because you don't know what the person is looking at any point in time. Okay, so what can we do with exploratory data to make the experience as story-like as possible? The first one is to choose appropriate visuals, okay? And the example I always give here is if you're visualizing something over time, the line chart. Line chart shows how thing moves over time. Make sure that when you do a line chart, your time is on the y-axis, x-axis, on the x-axis, because that's how people see time. It moves from left to right. So that kind of thing is ensure that your data is sorted in time order. It's not sorted largest to smallest, then you have to work out which month was which. You know, these kinds of things. This is how you choose an appropriate visual that someone at least can get the story experience regardless of what data they've got showing at the time. Okay? The second thing, colors. Now, there's a lot to talk about colors. We could do a whole hour on colors if we really wanted to. We won't. But there are two very important things with colors. The first one is, if you're going to represent something with a color, make sure you always represent the same thing with the same color. So if you're going to do male and female, and you choose a color palette for that, make sure that male is always the same color, and female is always the same color. If you're going to show some sort of sales versus a different type of sales, depending on what it is, just use colors. Think about why you're using colors. Don't just splash them onto your reports. And then the second one is also just to remember how colors work for everyone. And it doesn't work the same for everyone. So people who have different kinds of color blindness may not be able to tell the difference between red and green, for instance. So make sure that you just keep those in mind when you're choosing colors to do different things. Okay? And some of that is like, I can't avoid red and green, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a symbol to make sure that it's not the only thing telling a person whether a number is good or bad. I'm going to add a little an icon next to it that shows up or down, because anyone who can see can interpret that. So you're making you're considering your person, and you're telling a story in multiple ways. Okay. Third one is provide people with as many filters as you can. Go too overboard, but try and give them the option to ask as many different questions as they want, because you really want your users to be able to try and answer their questions as well as possible. And then the final one is, if you have anything that's really strange or weird in your data, use a visual header tooltip to explain what's going on underneath. And I will do that. Please remind me when we get to the moving scatter plot to show you this, okay? Because we're going to get there a little bit later, but I will show. I did put it into the demo. Okay, so exploratory data. It's quite difficult to create stories for exploratory data, but let's have a look at what we can do. So let's go into our demo. Okay, so first let me quickly explain to you what this data is. So every year, the US Census Bureau publishes a text file with the names of every baby who was registered with the Bureau, whatever they're called. And basically it's 5 columns. It's name, gender, and in this case, we only have male and female. They only represent male and female in this data set. So name, gender, year, state, and how many babies were born with that name in that combo. Okay, so it's a really simple data set. And if you think about it, it's really boring. Like, there's not a lot going on in that data set. And yet, I've taken those 5 columns and I've built this entire report, okay? So we have a report here that gives us a whole bunch. At the top, we've got a whole bunch of sort of key metrics: total number of babies born, how many different names were given. If we take the top 10 most popular names, what percentage of all babies had one of those names, and then what was the most popular name overall. So here you've got a couple of cards with key figures that immediately pop out at you. Look how they change over time. If I go, hey, we only look at the last, 50 years. So let's go to 1974 to 20 and see what changes. Oh. Hey, look at that. So a whole bunch of stuff changed, and we're not really that interested in the data in this specific case, but it at least shows us. Now, what else have I done here to make this? What else have I done? Now, I'm representing male and female with colors here. Is it clear to you which color is which? Okay. I haven't put a legend anywhere. Okay, that is by choice. I don't want to distract anyone. In this case, I didn't want to put a legend there, but I'm hoping that these 2 visuals on the right-hand side, where it says 10 most popular male names and 10 most popular female names, because they're all solid in one color, they tell you the male is green, female is purple. And everywhere else, you can actually see that. You can also, if you hover over a point, it does tell you that purple is female, green is male, and same in any of the graphs. If you hover over the point, it'll tell you that thing. But what I have done, obviously, is very consistently use the same color for the same to represent the same thing. And then I've given the report a whole bunch of slices. So you want to know what people are named in Texas? Yeah, I should have gone with something close at the start of the alphabet. But anyway, let's look at Texas. Wouldn't be surprised if we have lots of, most of it's actually pretty much the same as the rest of the country. So we'll look at an example just now that has.
Well, Jose is interesting.
Jose, yeah, that is one that is very much, and actually there'll be a whole little thing that talks about that 2 slides time. Okay, so here is, as I said, this is exploratory data. I don't know what questions you're going to ask in this point in time. I've tried to answer as many questions as I can without you having to do any work. So if you want to say how many babies were born in a specific year, you choose 1 year, it would show you on the card. If you wanted to say how many total names are there, it tells you. If you want to say, what is the most popular female, male name, you can get them. If you want to say, if you want to only look at a specific male or female, you can do that. So I've given as many possibilities as I can without trying to overload the graphic. And hopefully for someone who is interested in this data set, for whatever reason, they would be able to explore this as much as possible with this single report. Okay, don't think I've got any visual tooltips here. We'll go to the visual tooltip just now. Okay, so that's exploratory data. So I'm not going to talk too much more about exploratory data because what we're really interested in terms of storytelling is what we call explanatory data, i.e. explaining known data. Okay, so there's a couple of things we do when we're explaining known data. Now I'm not going to the slides should talk for themselves. So we remove clutter, okay? We establish patterns by using consistent colors, fonts, sizes to represent the same thing. Our headers all the same size, our subtitles all have the same size. That kind of thing. It makes it much easier for a user to use the thing, okay? From an ethical point of view, we want to make sure that we don't pick and choose what visuals we show because it suits the story we're trying to tell. You must, in fact, it's more important to show things that don't suit your story than having 20 visuals that support your story. Make sure that if there's anything that doesn't suit your story, that it's known so that the decision maker, the person who's absorbing the story and has to get the context and form the emotional connection, knows that there is this outlier or reason that it doesn't work. And then when we know data, know what our data shows and says, adding a little bit of text makes it super easy and super clear for the consumer to understand the story you're trying to tell, okay? Now, that doesn't mean write an entire paragraph or 3 pages. We want to have little concise things, but if you think of data journalism, often they'll have that. They'll have a chart and then they'll have a little text box that says something, something, something about this chart. And then they'll have another chart and a little bit that says this, this, this about the chart and highlights a key point or it explains something, okay? We've kind of talked about this already, so let's not go through any of that. No, I'm not going to talk about any of that. I will leave the slides. This talk is also uploaded on YouTube. If anyone wants to see it in more detail or actually talk through any of those points, I'll give the link to Cailin and she can share it in detail. Okay, so again, what kind of tools can we use within Power BI? I've talked about tooltips already. I'll show you examples now. Moving data, again, I've talked about it. We're going to see an example right now. Color as a pre-attentive attribute. Now, you've already seen a pretty good example of this where I use the colors in the male and female, but I'll show you one that really explains how we use color for pre-attentive attributes on the very next demo. And then the last thing is, how do we make the emotional connection? And that's what we're going to talk about now as we go through. Oh, there we go. That's the end of the slideshow. Yay, no more theory. So now we're just going to tell stories. Okay, so from here, all we do is we're gonna tell stories. Okay, so let's start with, we're going to move on to this next page, which is called data stories. And our first story is called population growth. And this one, the reason I include this is to talk about that ethical point that we highlighted before. Okay, so I took just a single graphic from that explanatory report of mine. I took it by number of babies by year and sex. Now, in this specific case, I'm not really interested in the sex or the gender of the babies at birth. I just want to show population growth. So we're going to remove, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the split of male and female, and we're just going to show the years, the total number of babies born each year. Okay, and then you can see I've already added a little bit of text here. And here's where I use a pre-attentive attribute. So the number of babies born per year in the USA has stayed relatively constant since 1980. Since 1980 is written in orange. Where do you think 1980 is on my graphs?
The orange starts.
Where the orange starts. So immediately, I'm hoping that you don't really have to think about that too much. That is super intuitive, and that's what a pre-attentive attribute is. It makes something intuitive. So I'm talking about however the US population has continued to grow. So we're talking about last 30 odd years. I'm sorry, 45 years. Jeez. We're talking about the last 45 years of data, and we're saying that basically on the one graph, we're seeing that there's a number of babies per year, which is staying relatively similar. On the other graph, the population just growing and growing and growing. It's not going anywhere. Okay? And this is where ethical things come in here. Because if I wanted to make a point that would inflame Donald Trump, you know what I would do? I'd put a Mexican flag on this page. And immediately, you know where his mind is going to go. Immigration! And you go there. But reality, we need more information here. We can't just say this is because of immigration. We have no idea. That may be true, but let's add some additional information. And what I've done here is I've actually gone, thanks, Manuel. I've gone and added another data set here, which I just went and got from Wikipedia, which is the average life expectancy per year. You can see that over time, people are living for longer. And that makes much more sense as to why the population is growing, is because people are living for longer. And that is the major contribution. If you go and do all the maths behind it, you'll see that, yes, there is an immigration factor, but realistically, the change in life expectancy is what's really changing the population year on year in America. Just a couple of other points on this specific story. I've included my data sources. So if anyone wants to go and check my data, verify what I've said, make sure that I'm not trying to hoodwink them, they can go and see exactly where I got the data for each point that's on this graph. And then, as I say, I've got the narrative on the right-hand side, which makes it really easy for someone to follow what I'm trying to show on this story. Okay. Very easy story. There we go. We've talked about a couple of things here, ethics and pre-attentive attributes mainly. Okay, story number 2. This one's a bit more difficult. So, or not a bit more difficult, but it's a bit more requires a bit of thinking. Okay, so I've got 2 graphs here, both again taken from that exploratory report of mine, and you can see I've put in quite long titles here to explain what I'm trying to show with these 2 graphs. So firstly, the number of unique names has increased over time. So there are more unique names registered now than there were in the 1900s. Okay? People are more willing to give their children names outside of the ordinary, different names, etc., etc. And then on the opposite side of this, but representing basically exactly the same point, is that fewer and fewer people have one of the 10 most popular names. So if we take the 10 most popular female names or the 10 most popular male names, you can see that in the early days of this data set, almost 37%, so more than a third of all males had one of the top 10 names. And 25, so almost a quarter of all females had one of the top 10 most popular names. Now, if you go down, and you go and look, both of those numbers are under 10%. So if you think there are lots of Liams or Olivers or things in your children's classes now, imagine how bad it would have been in 1910. Like, you would have been basically every third kid would have one of 10 names. So yeah, in a class of 30, you would be having 10 people with the same sort of names. Okay, well, sharing those names. Okay, so those were the 2 points that made me explore this story, was to start with those 2 graphs. And then I decided to add some more context. Okay, so the next thing I added was I went and looked at states to see, is there anything interesting I can see here as to how popular the female names are by state and how popular the male names are by state. And you can see that that graph is actually quite useless. The shading is meant to be telling the story, but it actually is not. So even though I'm representing country data in this point, and generally, or location data, and generally best practice would say, if you're representing location data, you should do it on a map. In this case, the maps don't give me the context that I want to see. So I'm actually going to ignore that advice. And that's where that whole Captain Barbosa thing about guidelines and rules came in. And I'm going to use a different graph to show this point that I'm trying to show. So I'm going to quickly, oh, sorry, I don't know why this is so slow, but anyway, here we have now we have the most popular name. So now you can see that actually in over time, we've got 31% of people in Rhode Island have one of the 10 most popular names, okay? Still over the entire period. This is not at a startup period or whatever. So Rhode Island is really quite, let's call it conservative, not politically, but conservative in the naming standards that they're applying to people, particularly for males. But you can also see here that the concentration of male names is significantly higher than the concentration of female names across most of America, okay? So there's some really, like, I don't know if this is interesting to anyone else, but this is interesting to me as to what goes on and how people are sort of naming their kids and what's happening there. And you can see that even in the most, or the least, most liberal naming state in Utah, you've got almost 15% of males have the same 10 names. Okay, so that's another part of that story. And then what did we add to that? Oh, then we just had some text. So, and now we have just a little bit of an explainer. From 1910 till 2008, there was a steady increase in the number of unique names. Since 2008, there seems to be a decrease, or at least a steadying. Females have always had a larger variety of names, and the gap was widening over time. And now it seems as though that gap is starting to narrow. Now that sort of speaks to the fact that the world is changing slightly, and men are not expected as much to be, solid rock type people. There's a changing expectation. So there's a lot going on here. And again, the last point, historically, the concentration has been more than twice as large in men. But in 2009, for the first time, women had a higher percentage. So you can see that's on this graph here. We had a little situation where the females actually went above the males. So again, just this story, and like I say, this is fairly boring data, but there's quite a lot going on here telling you how the world is changing. People are feeling more free to do different things, to name their kids more originally, all kinds of stuff going on there. So yeah, for me, it's quite an interesting thing. Okay, and then the last story in this little set is do with alphabetical distribution. So again, data by itself, a little bit boring. So let's put in our first little visual. I need to tell you the story first. Okay, so if you just look at which names share the first initial, there's some data, but it's not really that interesting. But then what I went and did was I went and downloaded a list of words from the English dictionary, actually the English Scrabble dictionary. I then classified them by how many of them share the first letter. And now we're comparing how names on our x-axis compares to the percentage of words in the dictionary on the y-axis. And now we can actually see something that's like, now we can see outliers and things that are weird. And so what do we do then?
Isn't it the other way around? X and Y?
Sorry, yes, on the y-axis is the names of the initials, and the x-axis is the dictionary. Sorry, my bad. So now what I've done is I've basically then color-coded them based on how far away they are from their distribution in the English language. So anything that's a darker color, whether it's a darker green or a darker yellow, is quite far away from the distribution in the English language, whereas anything that's kind of shaded towards a gray is close. And we have some weird outliers here. We've got J in particular, and if you think about it, if you think about all the people you know whose names start with J, you'll start to see that this is genuinely the thing. James, John, there's loads and loads of names that will now escape my head other than J. Jacob, Jessica, yeah, there's loads and loads of names that start with J. And then on the opposite side, we have P and U. Now, if anyone could tell me before we move on to the next slide why P and U are the two that have the biggest negative variance, I'll be very impressed. In fact, if you can tell me that why J has the largest positive variance, I'll also be very impressed. I had to go and research all of this.
Yes, un is a common prefix on a lot of words.
That is awesomely
Pre
done. Yeah, so U and P are the two most common letters in the English languages for prefixes. So loads and loads of words start with U and P because they are variations of other words. Uncommon, uncouth, and this, and that, and pre, post, Perrie. There are loads and loads of prefixes of words that start with those two letters. And that is literally the exact reason why these two things are so disproportionately represented in the dictionary versus names. J and K, anyone have an idea? J in particular, don't worry. K is when no one's really sure why K is there. But anyone have an idea for J? So J is it actually comes from Hebrew, from the Bible. J is the letter that represents God, Yerusha, Jehovah, all of the various ways that religion refers to, the Hebrew Bible refers to the Lord. Almost all of them start with a J, or the Hebrew equivalent. And when those names were converted into English, they then absorbed this letter J, and that's actually where they come. So J and Y, sorry, are the two that show the influence of the Hebrew language of Christian faith over the naming of children. So again, if you go back to that very first slide and you look over time, you'll see that in the early 1900s, where my data set starts, J and Y is it's like crazy overrepresented. And as we've come closer and closer to time, these numbers go closer towards what we would expect to see, because fewer and fewer people identify as Christian and therefore use this as the basis for names. So yeah, anyway, that again, this for me, this really was fun to research this and try and understand what was going on from probably a pretty boring, pretty boring data set. Okay, so I saw a couple of reactions on the chat, and I think immediately, as soon as someone's starting to react to something or engage with it, you've formed that connection that I was talking about earlier. This is exactly how you know, if you want to get your business users interested in the data that you're telling them, tell them a story, show them this kind of thing that'll get them to react with a shocked face or a happy face or a thumbs up or whatever it is, because then you're doing your job, you're really getting them. Okay, let's move on.
Is that the scatter plot? We wanted to remind you of the tooltips.
Was it here?
Well, I don't know.
I think it's on the next one. Here we go. Scatter plot. Okay, it's on this one. So somewhere here, I have a tooltip that tells me some story. Let me tell you the story. Let me tell you the whole story here, because this one we don't have a lot. So I have a couple of friends who inspired this story. I have a friend whose name is Ashley. He's a male, and I have a friend whose name is Kelly, and he's a male. And I have a friend named Gail, who is a male. And all of these names are traditionally not associated with that gender. So I was interested in, over time, do names change as to whether they are more male or more female associated? So I went and found a bunch of names that fulfilled this criteria, which I arbitrarily decided on. So 50,000 babies have to have been given this name in the last 110 years. And in 1 year, at least 65% of them had to be male. So at one point in time, at least 2/3 of babies born with that name were male. And at another point in time, at least 65% of them have to be female. Okay, just so you know, that's the criteria that I used. And then I went like, and these are the names here that ended up that matched that criteria. There's about 90 of them. And then I went and said, like, how do we see this over time? And are there any interesting things that we can see here? And now I've got to try and remember. There's a very specific name that I point out in the graph. And unfortunately, it's not moving very smoothly, particularly for the presentation. So I hope you'll vibe with me, but it comes now. Around about 1935, name comes in here, and I've just got to find it so that I can highlight it for you. I refreshed my data this morning, and now it's slightly different to what it used to be. Angel's on the next slide. No, it's not this one, but okay. Let's do Angel. We won't talk. Anyway, there was one about Jean, and Jean became switched from being a very, very strongly female associated name to becoming a very, very strongly male associated name, and it's basically stayed as it's leveled out a little bit, but it's essentially still a very strongly male associated name. And people are like, but I've never met a male named Jean, until you realize that with the spelling Jean is pronounced Jean. And it is it was a very popular, it's not so popular anymore. And this was a story of how the influence, it came from an actor. There was an actor in the mid-1930s, Jean somebody or other, I don't know, and that name has basically stayed as a male name ever since that point in time.
You say Jean-Claude Van Damme.
No, not in the 1930s.
Until you said 1930s.
No, it wasn't that one. But yeah, anyway, so again, I'm speeding through this, so I don't want to keep you guys for too long. But this was a story of how things change. But it would be impossible to represent this data in any way other than in a moving chart. How else would you show someone that a name in 1 year was male and in another year was female? And if I could remember, there were a couple here that I used to, that I can highlight if we had more time. But Kelly is one, Perrie is another. Some of them stay in the middle and they sort of vacillate like us, and then some of them go like woo, woo across the screen, and it's kind of weird. There's no real pattern. It's some of them are not super popular, so there's only 100 babies in a year. So if 10 are male, it fluctuates wildly. But some of them are very popular, and they still have this. So this is quite an interesting one. Again, if you go and watch the YouTube thing, I do spend a little bit more time on this slide. But I have two more stories. Somewhere here was that. Sorry, let me just see if I can find it. Is it here?
James,
yeah.
What visual do you use for a time series,
for this?
Moving, or you're going to explain that?
No, well, this is just a built-in scatter plot. If you just put in your time on, there's a thing there called play axis. You put the time on the play axis, and then this is a standard Power BI visual. There's nothing funny about it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's standard. Somewhere I have. Let's see. Sorry, is it actually? I'll look for it in Power BI just now. Just give me a second. But okay, let's go. Let's quickly. We've got two more things to go through. This one is very fast. Again, this is to do with immigration / changing demographics. And if you may or may not know the people on the left-hand side, at the bottom we have Angel from Buffy. Just above that we have Angel de Maria, who is a Argentinian football player. Then we've got somebody or other, I'm not sure who the singer is, and then just an angel. So basically what I did was I went and found all the people in this data set whose name was Angel, Angel. I then plotted how many babies were born, and there was this really weird thing that I noticed, which was that the number of female babies stayed fairly similar, but the number of male babies went crazy. Then I was like, well, why would that have happened? And then I overlaid some state data. And here I have the gender variance. So in states here where it's green, it means that the number of males named Angel is much higher. In states where it's purple, the number of females are higher. And then what I did was I went to Wikipedia and I went and said, how many people in each state speak Spanish as a first language? And if you put those two graphs over each other, they are almost identical. And that was, for me, formed a very strong correlation as to why males would be called Angel, because it's a Spanish name, Angel, and it's a male name. Whereas in the Bible Belt, if you go here into this part of America, in the red or the purple, depending on which graph you're looking at, then obviously the girls are being named Angel because it's the biblical reference, it's the Christian faith, that influence. So again, another interesting, for me, quite an interesting thing that I quite enjoyed digging into. And the point here really is that a lot of the time you can add context to data by finding additional data that has some meaning. So in this case, it was the Spanish speaking. In the other case, it was to do with the population growth, the life expectancy. I've gone and find supplementary data sources here. They're not difficult data sources. I haven't gone and written big machine learning algorithms or clustering or modeling or anything. This is a list of 50 states. What is their current Spanish-speaking population? That's it. That's all that I did to build this thing. So again, adding a little bit of context can often make your stories much more interesting. Okay, so how do you form, the last question, how do you form an emotional connection with people? The first thing you do is you take something that people love. Okay, so what did I do here? I went and found 4 TV series, movies, franchises, whatever you want to call them, that people generally are quite keen on. I have Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and Friends. Okay, what do I do there? Then I built this weird little narrative report that tells information about the characters in these series. Okay, now Harry Potter data actually pretty boring. It turns out that J.K. Rowling did not have as much of an influence on American people naming their kids as you would think. Maybe Hermione. There was never a baby in America named Hermione up until the year 2000. And since then, there've been a steady-ish stream, 29 births a year. So, okay, that one you could probably say this is pretty much probably down to, this is pretty much down to Harry Potter. I think you can say that with a fair degree of confidence. Ron, again, also difficult. Ron, is Ron really the name? Is it Ronald, Ronnie? There's variations. It'd be very difficult to pull this in, but it certainly didn't have a big spike in popularity in the given name Ron. It was in the 1960s. There was quite a lot of people in America called Ron, but not really. And again, in Harry doesn't really do anything. So this particular data set, not very interesting, but I can already form an emotional connection with you because you're interested in what I'm going to tell you. So Game of Thrones. Let's talk about Game of Thrones. Because Game of Thrones had some very unique character names in it. Okay? Like Arya. Arya, not a common name. You can see this in my graph. Again, very, very few people named Arya. And now more than 2,000 babies were named Arya in whatever the last line is on this data set, 2018. Okay, more than 2,000 babies were named Arya that year. So this has clearly had some sort of influence on naming standards. Obviously, this is an American series. Harry Potter is much more British. This is very much American, very much influenced by very influential in pop culture right now. Okay, then we have some other names. Wait, before we go to Daenerys, let's look at Khaleesi. Okay, Khaleesi, not a word. George R.R. Martin made this word up. Whatever he made this name up, Khaleesi, and yet in America there are 440 odd kids named America in the last year of our data set. Okay, so again, clearly there is some sort of influence from pop culture on what people call their children, and there's at least some sort of attention paid to this. I did a very quick, just as a last story, I did a very quick thing on London, on North London, and the number of kids named Henry after Thierry Henry played for Arsenal. And again, Henry was like a massive spike because it was a British, you could pass it off as a British name, but all the Arsenal fans were naming their kids after Thierry Henry. So again, Daenerys, another name made up by the author of Game of Thrones. never a name up until basically the TV series came on, and then people started naming them. Not nearly as many as Khaleesi, weirdly enough. Khaleesi, which is a title, not a name, is much more popular than Daenerys, which is the actual name. Okay, so there's some, for me, that's a nice way to say to people, actually, there is definitely some influence from pop culture. But this is my favorite data story that I have, and I'm going to end with this. So I love Friends. I really, really, really love Friends, and I did love it. So I took the 6 characters, and I decided that we needed to see what happened to each of their names. So the first one is Chandler. Now, Chandler, I was surprised at how many kids were named Chandler before the start of Friends, but just about 1,000 in the year before Friends started. And you can definitely see that there was a big spike in popularity in the 10 years that Friends was on TV. And that it stayed fairly popular after that, although not quite as popular. But a lot of people who would have watched Friends in their teens and maybe even their young teens have been having kids up till now. And Chandler is still a name that is quite common in America. 1,000 kids a year are named Chandler in America. So that was pretty cool for me. Like, that's definitely one way I can say. Okay, Joey suffers a bit from the same problem as Ron that I had earlier. Joey is not necessarily the actual name. You've got Joseph, Joe, all kinds of variations. So this one doesn't really seem as though there was any sort of correlation. Okay, Monica. Monica was a very popular name before Friends started, and then it got less popular. And I was thinking, well, is that to do with Monica being quite a controlling, dominating female character? And then I also realized that in 1994, there was another Monica in America. There was quite a big scandal around her. So I don't know how much of this name we can attribute to Monica from Friends, because there was also Monica from the White House. So we're going to have to take this one and on advisement, as we say. Okay, Phoebe is another name that actually grew in popularity over the course of the show and has continued to grow in popularity ever since. So again, difficult to say that this was directly due to Friends, but it is interesting to show how much more popular Phoebe is as a name since the start of 1994 up until basically now. So yeah, again, nice, interesting one. And then we come to Ross and Rachel, everyone's love to hate, favorite, worst couple, whatever we call them. So let's look at, we're going to start with Ross. Sorry, don't look at Rachel. Don't load Rachel. Show me Ross. Okay, Ross. So Ross, Ross was quite a popular name before the start of Friends. Okay, it was dropping off in popularity. Then then Friends started. Then Ross and Rachel got together in season 2, and we had a huge spike. In season 3, they were together, and then they broke up. And Ross fell off a cliff, like literally, like it's never recovered. The name Ross has never recovered from the TV series breaking up Ross and Rachel. Literally tracks 100% to that event. So what you would think is that Rachel would go in the opposite direction. Everyone hates on Ross a lot. So once Rachel and Ross broke up, you'd think that Rachel would go in the opposite direction. It turns out Rachel was a very popular name, very, very popular name. It got more popular in season 2 when Ross and Rachel were together. It got more popular in season 3 when Ross and Rachel were together, and then it fell off a cliff. So the worst thing that's ever happened to both of those names, Ross and Rachel, is them breaking them up in a TV series at the end of season 3. Which for me is literally my favorite data story that I've ever found. So yeah, anyway, that is the end of everything I had to say to you. I'm sorry if I kept you too long, but thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you learned something. I hope you formed an emotional connection. And if you take nothing else away from this talk, always remember that the worst thing that happened to Ross and Rachel as names in America was that they broke the characters up in Friends in 1996. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic, James. Thank you so much. I'm also a mad fan of Friends, so this was fun. I enjoyed this. But awesome. Thank you so much for spending your time here. And I'm sure that if there are any questions from anyone in the room or anyone online, now's the best time to ask. So please raise your hands online if you do have any. No questions? Anyone in the room?
What would be nice is if you could see how Khaleesi, obviously she was good right until the final season.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
I did refresh this data up to 2024 this morning, and yet it doesn't seem to have updated this visual.
it does the source data. Yes, you might have refreshed the report, but is it a
No, I mean, I went and downloaded the new source data from the page. I will check. There may well be a page filter somewhere that I've missed. I'm sorry if I did, but I did think it would show. It's going up to 2018, eh?
Yeah.
It's definitely not got the last few years, but I will try and find out why. But anyway.
Awesome. Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you so much for your time, James, and for coming to present to us today, as well as Vusi online for your really interesting Power BI news. I have popped the QR code in the chat for some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to give us any feedback that you have. I will also pop the link. If you can't open that QR code, I'll pop the link in the chat to the feedback form as well. For those of you who are in person, we do have some pizzas outside, so please stick around if you'd like to stick around, mingle, chat. And for those of you online, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next month online. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
I'm amazed at how much you managed to wring from the
Such a
data,
boring
yeah?
data set. No,
I did try. I named my dog.